Need to get that going on our end with IT.
So do we
Okay.
where's the rest of our board? Are they not? They just got their video off?
No, my understanding is we might be missing the 2 county members. I think they are on break. I know 1 or 2 of them might actually be out of town.
Okay.
So I don't know if they're going to be joining us, but we do have a quorum. Madam Clerk, are we ready?
You are ready, Madam Chair. You may call your meeting to order at this time.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at this special CHAB meeting. We're all busy. I know this was an out of the ordinary meeting and I appreciate very much you all making the time. And I most appreciate staff from all the jurisdictions and working to gather the information that will be presented today. I think it was, I appreciate the efforts and I think it's, you're gonna see it's worthwhile that we held this emergency meeting. Welcome to the Monday, July 20th meeting of the Community Homeless Advisory Board. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I have this up in my background, so if we all want to stand and we'll pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Madam Clerk, first order of business is to call the roll.
Yes, Madam Chair. Jardine.
Here.
Delgado.
Here.
Lawson.
Here.
Dare.
Here.
Bergbiegler absent. Lucy absent. Madam Chair, you do have a quorum of the Community Homelessness Advisory Board. I would like to note to each of the council members on at this time, a quorum of this board is 4 members. So should any of you have to leave, exit, or not be available for any part of this meeting, it would break quorum and we would need to stop your meeting at that time. So if you can just be cognizant of that through the meeting, it would be appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, we're going to move into public comment at this time. And before we begin public comment, would you remind those for this meeting and future meetings how we receive and transmit public comment?
Yes, Madam Chair. As will be noted during the time in which this board remains under your chairship with Reno providing council support to this board, or such time that this board chooses to make a change in that action. Going forward, public comment may be received for this board by way of sending an email to me at cityclerk@reno.gov or by way of submitting online public comment through our online public comment form. Additionally, they may call and leave a voicemail. All of this information is included on the top of each agenda that is posted. For additional security provisions, we will not be taking live public comment through these meetings. However, any public comment received will be sent to the board members for review and inclusion in the record prior to the time of adjournment.
Madam Clerk, can you for the record remind people, I think the easiest way that many can submit their public comment is leaving a voicemail, which then gets transcribed and sent to all of us. Can you for the record say that number?
Yes, I can. For the, as soon as I pull it up on the agenda, that is correct. The easiest way to leave public comment, if you are unable to send in writing, you may do so by leaving a voicemail, and that number will be transcribed. I apologize, I'm pulling it up as we're discussing right now.
I think it might be 334-2030.
That is actually the city clerk's line, which people are welcome to do that. However, it's not as fast of a response. The best way to do it is actually by leaving a voicemail at 775-393-4499. Again, that is 775-393-4499. And that information will be included on the agendas going forward. And again, any voicemails that are received will be transcribed and sent to the electeds on this body and will be included in the record.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And if we could, on the going forward, make those venues of providing public comment prominent on the agenda, probably right under our names, if that's possible, that would be great.
Okay, we will do what we can as staff to help facilitate that.
Yeah, I just wanted to stand out so people know the 3 different ways in which they can submit public comment for these meetings. Thank you. With that, we will move on to the approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item? I apologize, let me back up. We didn't take public comment.
We have no general public comment that has been submitted to me at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 4. Do we have any public comment on the approval of the agenda?
None.
May I get a motion?
So move.
Motion by, second by Lawson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Okay, we will move on to item 5, presentation, discussion, and possible action on a short-term emergency shelter. Arlo, you're up. Again, thank you for all your work. I gave you a tight turnaround time.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arlo Stockham. I'm City of Reno Community Development Director and Acting Assistant City Manager. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully this will work. I have a brief presentation for you today focusing on emergency homeless sheltering and in particular a very short-term plan. As many of you know, we're going to need to make some changes here in the near future to vacate the Reno Event Center, and this outlines plans to do so. Let me try to go full screen here.
Arlo, before we get into this, can you explain to the board and to the public the receipt of the notice to vacate from the RSCVA?
Yes, I can. It's part of the presentation, but in effect, there's a need to get the community going again. And the RSCVA has asked us to vacate the Reno Event Center by August 3rd, which is a pretty short timeline. As you know, we've had homeless individuals sheltering in there essentially since the onset of COVID. So it's a time-sensitive issue. I can touch on a few of the details here in my presentation. I'm assuming this is on screen, so I'm going to proceed. Just a little bit of background. Prior to COVID, our homeless facilities were already taxed and essentially at or over capacity. We had the Record Street Community Assistance Center, Washington Street Overflow Shelter, and then temporary overflow in the form of a winter tent at the CAC. Also have facilities under construction, which will certainly help, but they're not completed as of today. And transitional housing, of course. But even with all that, there was a very significant unsheltered population even prior to COVID. And that really hasn't gotten any better. The impacts of COVID are significant. In particular, the social distancing really made the capacity limitations of our existing facilities that much more acute. The folks just don't fit in any types of numbers with social distancing. In addition, we're expecting, and I think starting to see, an increase in the homeless population. We have increasing numbers of folks out on the street, unsheltered. We also had to suspend our clean and safe operations. They're now resumed. However, that led to really a flood of concerns coming in about the impacts and concerns related to homeless individuals in the parks and the streets. It's really, it's been pretty problematic in downtown Reno with unsheltered homeless needing places to go. So the bottom line is we need a larger site. We need a larger facility. And the good piece is we have an opportunity to use CARES funding to help fund that. So that's really the situation we find ourselves in. In terms of where the folks are staying today, with social distancing, we have 35 qualified men at the Community Assistance Center in the men's shelter. The Our Place Family Shelter opened in June with 140-person capacity. The Our Place Women's Shelter is scheduled to open August 15th, pretty quickly here. And those women are currently using the Washington Street Overflow Shelter, which is about at capacity right now. And then the balance are at the Reno Event Center. The Reno Event Center currently has a 306-person capacity. It was a little higher previously, but some of the beds were moved with the family and women's shelter. And our typical use really hasn't reached capacity yet. We're generally ranging in 230 to 265 folks staying there. At our peak, we got up to 290 people. So really that's about the scale of it. And as mentioned earlier, the RSCVA did ask that we vacate the event center by August 3rd so they can prepare for some events scheduled the following week. The needs are largely covered for the families and women with Our Place. So the real focus of our near-term work is on a no barrier shelter to carry forward for this interim period of time. But efforts continue to be focused on securing and improving a longer-term sheltering site. What we're outlining here today is by no means long-term. It's very interim for a period of time until a larger site can be secured and improved with expanded capacity. So some of the considerations we had to go through trying to figure out where we can do this on an interim basis. It was availability. Very importantly, we wanted to at least maintain and preferably expand our current capacity. We need to be near support services and transit. Law enforcement and visibility from the street is very important for public safety. Also proximity to day use areas, so people have a place to go conveniently during the day. And to the extent possible, fewer facilities are better than more facilities for operational costs and other efficiencies. So with all that, again, continuing our pursuit of a larger site, longer term solution. To vacate the event center, we're proposing 2 locations, essentially roughly half going to expanded use at the CAC, and roughly half going to a new temporary shelter on East 4th Street, which I'll describe in a little more detail here. Within the CAC, we did a pretty detailed space analysis in terms of how many people can fit in there safely with social distancing. And we believe 135 people is comfortable if we use the entire building. That would include the traditional men's and women's shelter area, the Good Shepherd's clothes closet area, the apartment units in the building, as well as some common areas. In a pinch, we believe we can get 40 additional people, so up to 175 total. But the preference would be to keep it at 135 unless the capacity needs dictate additional people, then we could accommodate up to 175. And in addition, many of you have probably heard, we have reopened the day use facility at the CAC, and we have another tent shade structure on order to provide additional shade with social distancing. The shade's pretty limited. So that's kind of part 1 of the near-term plan. Part 2 of the near-term plan is to use the meal site that Truckee Meadows Water Authority owns. Very graciously, they have agreed to allow additional interim uses of their property. It's really pretty ideal site there on East 4th Street, the north side of East 4th, in front of the Governor's Bowl pretty much. We have a site plan, and we're able to accommodate about 18,750 square feet of shelter in a temporary tent shelter. That'll accommodate 165 people overnight. Really not a lot of site works needed. We are planning to tap into water and sewer, and that's the bulk of the work needed, along with a little bit of fencing. And all those utilities are right there on site, so it's pretty ideal from that perspective. In addition, we're planning to relocate the meals facility about a couple hundred feet to the west. to an adjoining Tumwa parcel that we'll be fencing off to provide some security for their facilities there. And lastly, we plan to open up the Governor's Bowl as a park and allow daytime park uses and also install a couple shade canopies there. And that would be a fairly convenient place for folks to go during the day and spend some time should they choose. The location of these sites, I apologize, I clicked twice. The CAC you see here on the left of your screen, this interim 4th Street site, real near the Spaghetti Bowl, just southwest of the Spaghetti Bowl along 4th Street, and the Our Place facility over on the NAMS campus. You can see those facilities are all in a pretty convenient corridor between I-80 and the Truckee River, centrally located. So I know you're going to struggle a little bit to see this preliminary site plan for the 4th Street site. What you see over on the right-hand side are 2 temporary shelters totaling the 18,750 square feet. Remaining on the parcel, it's a fully fenced parcel, is some open common areas along 4th Street in front of the tents and along the west side of the tents. That would be suitable for restrooms, showers, and just other gathering spaces. And then the meals, the picnic tables for the meals are currently located where these shelters will go. Those are going to be relocated with another shade structure on top of them to this corner parcel here. And that is large enough to accommodate those meals activities. And again, just a block and a half away is the Governor's Bowl Park where folks can use during the day. So really that's the presentation I have. We're on a pretty short timeline. We have roughly 2 weeks to get this assembled and get folks moved. We do have contractors we're working with, lining them up today, and they're committed to doing it on that schedule. These are pretty short-term tents. They do have floors for the sleeping tents, but they're not permanent structures. They're essentially very large tents like you'd rent for a special event. They're being used in a lot of other communities for temporary homeless sheltering. And we're going to do 2 shelters up at the Governor's Bowl Park, again for shade, with some porta potties up there. So that really wraps up my presentation. Happy to answer any questions anyone may have. And just wanted to, in closing, express appreciation, first and foremost, to Tumwa and their staff. They've been very responsive, helping us develop a site plan and see what's feasible in this location, as well as all the people who help make this happen and are working on longer term solutions as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Arlo. And if you put the screen where I can see everybody's hands if they want to speak. Thank you again, Arlo. I know and I know a number of the members having been involved with all issues surrounding our most vulnerable population is the desire to help is always there. The details, I think, are always able to be worked out. It's always the where. And the where is something that I know we have struggled with for providing services. Always. We always tend to run into an issue as to the where. And this was no different. This was no different. And I appreciate beyond words, Tumwa, Von Hartung was very helpful with Tumwa and getting this facility as well. I appreciate it very much because this could have drug on significantly longer and we could have been in a situation like Las Vegas. I think they just took down their COVID homeless support facility and I don't believe they replaced it with anything that I'm aware of. So thank you very much. I think this works out well as a short-term solution for a variety of reasons. The food service will be near where these tents are, which I think a co-location is always more convenient and people aren't having to traverse, particularly during super hot weather. And then providing some shade for the food service, that's a big deal. We've not had that before. And then additional shade at the Governor's Bowl, I think is significant as well, because it is hot. It's very, very hot. So with that, I will turn it over to my other board members if they have some questions. Wow, no question. Oh, Councilmember Dare, Member Dare.
Does good work. I mean, obviously, something has to happen, and I know that everyone's been moving. That's a lot to happen in a very short amount of time. My question, part of it goes, so when it comes to the river and things of that fashion, if this all goes and this flies how it does this mean we can have people go there and they can say that we have a place for you now and you can't be here at the river? How does that work? And because that's part of our concern as we have a growing population here, that's dangerous for the whole, I think it's not good for the whole area. So is that something, do we know if is that part of what gets to happen now?
Yeah, maybe I'll provide a brief answer and hand it off to legal counsel for their opinion on that matter. It was very important for us to maintain the capacity we have at the Reno Event Center for the reasons cited. As I mentioned earlier, we have not been at capacity at the Reno Event Center, so we do have shelter space available. And that, I think, is one of the key criteria to do some enforcement within parks. Beyond that, not being the attorney to this group, I see Mr. Sudi on the line. It might be best if he responds to that more from a legal perspective.
Yeah, this is Brian Sudi for the record, Deputy City Attorney for City of Reno. There are some complications because of COVID and enforcement. A lot of areas in the City of Reno, there are laws that don't apply, such as camping. We are not like Boise was, where Boise had a citywide camping ordinance. Reno doesn't have that. We have a limited jurisdiction laws. So camping doesn't apply in parks. There's limited camping ability along the river. And outside of that, it's very hard to regulate. On top of all that, the CDC put some guidelines down to limit the ability to move homeless people due to the COVID outbreak. So that was recommended not to move homeless people and campsites at this time because of COVID. So enforcement wise, there's not much to enforce. A lot of the things that you saw as far as the cleanup crews were going are either regulated through the parks, because the park can be closed to all the public and the park can be cleaned and then reopened back up. So that was a lot of the cleaning that you're seeing right now. In areas where the city can't control those type of closures, the cleanings were really in connection with health department and health code violations. And so we were able to go in and remove those campsites for their own safety, because it was a health hazard for them to be there. The health department's not doing that anymore because of CDC regulations indicating don't move these people because you'll spread COVID. So it's a very challenging time because COVID has really impacted a lot of things that were happening, and in trying to encourage people to use shelter, trying to encourage people to go and use day space is now being limited because of the fact that we don't want to spread COVID amongst this population. So, and we have to abide by those guidelines. And if we are having any health code violations, right now the health department is not enforcing those health code violations because of the COVID outbreak. So it's a challenging time to try to balance the legality of everything, obviously, and protecting this vulnerable population in itself, because you don't want to see them get sick from health code violations, but we don't want to see COVID spread amongst them as well. So it is a very challenging time right now.
Well, there has to be a balance in that. I appreciate what you're saying. Our attorneys say similar things like that. So I get what you're saying, and I understand. Obviously, we every one of these people, we care very much, and we want to see them get the health that they need, and we don't want to do anything to bring harm. That's definitely without question. But at the same time, there are some things that potentially bring harm to our community, and that is a balance that has to be. We have to look at the whole picture. And I think if we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves looking at only one population as it harms other potential other population on our river, in our water, and on the thing. And so that's a very big concern for me. And so I hope that we see some balance on that conversation. Thanks.
Councilmember Lawson, I see your mute is off. Did you have a question?
I was just wondering, are we coordinating with Reno and Sparks along the river yet? I mean, I don't believe we are, but that could be different.
I guess I might not be catching the question, but we're coordinating on homeless services. I think each entity is kind of doing their own cleanup and law enforcement activities, as far as I understand. At Reno, we have our Clean and Safe program where we kind of do the cycle and do various cleanup activities. But to my knowledge, those are separate between agencies.
Okay.
Now, Arlo, and again, we may have to put this on a future agenda. My understanding is there is a coordinated effort that was launched. Maybe we need to put on a future agenda an update on that, because this whole pushing it from one jurisdiction and into the next and having various applications doesn't serve. I mean, particularly for this board, we're the community homeless board, and we seem to have reverted back to some silos, which doesn't help anything. So we'll put that when we get to the right agenda item. We'll put that on a future update to get a presentation. I know that the objective of this body was to work coordination, and maybe through some of the COVID efforts, we can facilitate that and clarify some of Mr. Sudi's interpretations along with some others, because I think there might be some varying, crazy legal opinions. I can't believe there'd be varying legal opinions. And maybe we can get some consistency so we can have a balance, as Mr. Dare said, Councilmember Dare. We have to be able to maintain the safety of our river water, the safety of our vulnerable population on the banks of our river, our water quality, our everything along there. And I worry that that is being degraded by some of the activities. I think our interim solutions, both the tent and then the shade structures at Governor's Bowl, are a move in the right direction for alternative options. Shade and food are something that is desperately needed in our community. We don't have a lot of it, and here we have some additional options. So, Councilmember Delgado, and then back to Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you, Vice President. Quick questions. I know everything that, I appreciate everyone's hard work on all this. We were saying it's temporary. What does temporary mean in the short term? What does short term mean? What are we doing in parallel? I think really quickly, without, I'm not saying this group, but I think without it feeling comfortable that now they're out of the Reno Event Center, now they're in tents, that people will get comfortable with the idea that they're somewhere. And so I'd like to hear, at least maybe not this meeting, but in the next one, about what's moving towards a more of a understanding COVID, understanding the social distancing. What are we thinking more longer term and moving in parallel with? So we're not just kind of saying it's, they're in a good place now. Before we know it, it's going to be the fall season. So the weather will start to change. Things will start to change really quickly. And so what have we learned from lessons learned about how we're dealing with services pretty much in the immediate. So it'd be interesting to hear from the team from all three jurisdictions about what that looks like. Also, there weren't any costs associated with any of this. My assumption is there'll be some shared costs of CARED funds and COVID costs about the tents. Tents aren't cheap either. Then we saw that at the CAC. These are larger. So didn't see any of that in the PowerPoint. Are we going to get some more information on all that? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Truthfully, we had hoped to not have to do this interim solution. Finding and securing longer term sites is easier said than done, and there's a lot of people working very hard on that right now. We see this as really to get through the summer and into fall, and some decisions are going to need to be made prior to winter. So really kind of a 4-month arrangement is at least how we're looking at this, not at all as a long-term arrangement. Many of you are aware of the efforts on certain sites, and we're expanding those efforts to potentially look at some additional sites for a longer term shelter, because this really is inadequate over the long term and not a good solution for winter either. So we're going to have some decision points here in the next couple months. What longer term options are we going to have available? Are we going to move on those, or are we going to look to winterize this site and carry it through part of winter? In terms of costs, we're working up those cost totals as we speak. I would note the Reno Event Center is extremely costly to operate. I understand we've been, pushing towards 10,000 a day or so just in operational costs there. What we're looking at here for these tent structures are on the order of $100,000 to $120,000 per month for rental with a 4-month rental. So this is, well over $500,000 plus the operational costs. It's not at all cheap, but it is a much cheaper option than for instance, the sprung structures or other more permanent structures. It is fully eligible for CARES funds, so that helps, but it's still quite expensive and not something we want to do over a long-term horizon.
And I think, Arlo, it's important. I think somebody who might be watching from the outside would say, well, for that amount of money, go rent an empty warehouse. And the issues surrounding that is, one, as everybody can imagine, properties, one, are hot commodities right now. Two, commercial property owners are reluctant to rent to this population. I mean, it's just a reality. And three, you need to have it in a location where these supportive services are within a reasonable distance for those to access. You don't want to put a warehouse in the North Valleys and all of the supportive services are at the Community Assistance Center. And then you're spending transport, and it just doesn't make it convenient. So there's, relational issues to all the other supportive services that you have to take into account. And while a tent or tents isn't ideal, I think for the short term, it's the best option with all those other factors kind of in play. So with that, I think Councilmember Lawson and then Councilmember Dale.
My question was on the cost. So what I'd like to see when you do get the cost to us then is, what are we spending per day? And what is the monthly rental, the hard cost versus the employee costs, or, those kind of deals.
Member Dale.
Yeah, and on the cost, it'd be good to do a comparison of what we're doing now. Like if you do that same exact thing, so you can look and say, okay, we know where we're at, we know what we're doing. On the other note, so from what I hear, RISE has been asked not to do the bring in nutrition and food in, and the Catholic Charities is. Is that how what kind of services are planned or put in motion over here on that 4th, if that's happening? Or are we asking RISE and some of our local groups to be involved? Because I mean, that's where we've been pushing very large on collaboration and trying to pull everyone together. A couple little things I'm getting on some of our public comment, it sounds like there are some that don't feel that happen. I'm just saying what they said. I'm not agreeing. I don't know if it's true or not. But with that said, are we collaborating? Because that's one of, I think, the best things that we've seen come out of a lot of what we're doing is that we are not trying to carry this all ourselves, that our community is stepping in. And then also, just to answer one of the questions I saw is, who will be bringing the food in, helping make sure that each of these, each person is taken care of? Thanks.
Yeah, we did a bunch of outreach last week on the direct question of meals, and this site, Catholic Charities, is prepared to essentially split their services and deliver meals here and also deliver meals to the CAC. So there's really the splitting of homeless facilities, the no barrier facilities into 2 sites, and the services associated with those facilities would also largely be split. So I know our team tried to reach out to all the stakeholders. This is all moving very fast, so apologies in advance if we missed some, but we have had meetings and discussions. And long story short, we're all in a very difficult situation, and everyone, I think's ears are open to great creative solutions. And to date, we haven't had any better ideas than what's on the table in front of you right now. So that's where we are.
Thank you. And I think part of the thing, and I think I received some communication about not getting much notice about this. Again, this kind of came together really quickly, and I appreciate that, because so there was a little bit of a tight turnaround, and I appreciate, Arlo, your reaching out to those groups. Can volunteer groups, I mean, there's a COVID restriction for food service, right? I mean, can volunteer groups, church groups, they can't bring in food, correct? Isn't that a COVID restriction?
I'm not familiar with that. Maybe Monica can help me out. I'm sure there's restrictions on how it's done.
Yeah, I thought I remembered that was part of the reason that there was one provider, was that some CDC or COVID restrictions said it's not ideal to have multiple, certainly not buffet type. I think that's not allowed from our governor.
What we're doing right now, and we've been doing since the start of COVID, is each provider is serving meals to go in to-go containers. So whether it's Catholic Charities or the Volunteers for Rise, they're all serving meals to go. I did have conversations last week with Ben Castro, just letting him know that Catholic Charities had volunteered just for consistency during this transition period, that they would offer to serve all the meals there. And then we'd possibly coordinate in some other way. It was just a suggestion for consistency, and for folks all to be going to one spot right there, and not being split between maybe people that are normally coming to eat at the rest stop, being confused with the food service for the individuals that are staying at the shelter, because they'll be so close in proximity. It was just a suggestion that we might kind of combine that for a while, just to keep things consistent for all the folks that are coming down there to get food. But Catholic Charities is still doing food to go, and they did offer to bring that food to go to CAC, and then also down to the 4th Street site.
Thank you very much for that. And speaking of the outreach to let the individuals know at the Reno Event Center, I know VOA has been involved with these discussions. I know Reno Police has been involved. I know that there was, the Community Assistance Center is our #1 calls for service. So Reno Police was looped in early on this. So my question is, how is information getting out to the homeless population at the tents and Reno Event Center, et cetera, to let them know this sort of consolidated site, and then the shade structures at the Governor's Bowl? How are we doing that outreach?
For those particular things, we haven't done outreach yet because they haven't come to fruition. Once we sign it and start working on moving forward with that particular site, we will start working with VOA, the ambassadors, probably Rise, also to get the word out that the different sites will be open. We have started some outreach in the downtown area around the bus station, letting folks know that the day area at the CAC campus is open. Since that is open now, we don't want to send folks to a site until it's ready to go. So that's how we'll go forward, probably the same way that we're doing it right now with the CAC campus reopening.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple items for clarification on the next meeting, which I think, if I have it correctly, that's August the 3rd. So we've got another pretty, is that correct? Our next meeting? First day in August?
That looks like it.
Okay, good. Good. Okay, so that's another tight turnaround, but thank you for all of that. Okay, do we have any other questions or comments from members at this time? All right, seeing none, Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
Madam Chair, we received 2 public comments that have come in after the time in which your meeting has been called to order. Those have been submitted to each of the council members and will be included in the record. Should be noted, we received a voicemail from Kim Bargucci with RISE. She has concerns about providing meals and locations for temporary locations. Additionally, Jay Colbert-Clausel is concerned with costs in the tents and the encampment criticisms. Again, those have been submitted to each of you as council members for your review and will be included in the official record. With that, Madam Chair, you have no further public comment.
Okay. Madam, let's see here. I think I just need a motion to accept the report.
I so moved to accept the report. Thank you.
Motion by Dare,
Second.
second by Lawson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries unanimously. Item 6, presentation and discussion related to a safe camp initiative. Mr. Stockton.
Okay, so good morning, Monica Cochran for the record. We have a presentation on sanctioned encampments and some research that we did along with some local information. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, so please bear with me because I seem to not be very good at this. I hope it works. Can anybody, nobody can see it? This is not good. Why is it not sharing?
Monica, we'll have IT at this point be able to, I think they're going to try and step in and give you the ability to control the screen.
Okay.
We're working on it on our end to help you.
That would be good. I have this in a Google Doc, and it seems to only want to share it with the 4 people that have been looking at it normally. I apologize.
If IT is not able to do it, I have this on my computer I could open.
Monica, quick question. Are you talking to us via Zoom through your desktop, or are you on Zoom on your computer?
I'm on my desktop.
Okay, just making sure that you have a camera and a microphone on.
I do.
So that should help. Okay. I believe IT is working on trying to give you control, but you should be able to hover and on your Zoom app and see a green button at the bottom that says share screen.
Got it.
There we go. You are now sharing your screen, Monica, so you can move into your full presentation mode and be able to advance your slides.
Okay. I can't really see what you guys can see, so I'm just going to not mess with this. We'll just go forward. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm sorry. Hetty is on the phone. We are going to kind of tag team this presentation, and this is going to be a slide that she's going to present on.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, so our point in time count took place this past January. It was January 30th of 2020. I just wanted to go over the numbers that were reported out real quick. So as you can see for our 2020 numbers, we had 459 folks counted as unsheltered. We had 258 in transitional housing and 514 in emergency shelter. So just to kind of go over some of those differences from last year, there was a reclassification that we did there from emergency shelter to unsheltered. Folks that were staying in the warming rooms at the CAC were considered an emergency shelter last year and years prior. That warming room does not meet the HUD definition of emergency shelter. So we reclassified those folks as unsheltered this year. And that accounted for about 60 of that 459. So even with that as a consideration, it was about a 70% increase in our unsheltered population. And that also accounts for that decrease in our emergency sheltered numbers. And our transitional housing numbers decreased because there was a large provider that declined to provide their information. And they also no longer consider their program to be transitional housing. So that's kind of a short recap of our point in time this year.
And so some local efforts that have been going on recently are the City of Reno's Clean and Safe Team, which was established in January of 2020. To date, 193 camps have been cleaned up of all sizes, and disposal of 3,483 yards of waste. We have various outreach efforts going on right now. There's agencies and teams that do outreach to encampments. They also coordinate with the Clean and Safe team and go out prior to any noticing and any cleanup. So about a week prior to any camp contact, we start outreach efforts. They usually come out about at least three times before there is a cleanup. There's also the Built for Zero outreach initiative that has an outreach committee that is right now meeting bi-weekly. So we're able to find some recommendations on encampments, and the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness released a document in 2018 cautioning communities on sanctioned encampments for various reasons. They stated that there's little impact on ending homelessness, they're very costly, they're difficult to manage, and they're temporary solutions. Their stance basically is that the access to stable housing that people can afford with the right level of services is what will help solve homelessness. Another study which was released by HUD, which was, it's called Understanding Encampments. It was released in 2018. It outlines some of the whys. So, across the country, we know that encampments are increasing. Why are they increasing? Number one, severe shortage in affordable housing, and then inefficient resources to address the program. We know that some people choose encampments over shelter or other solutions, and the research shows the reason for that is shortcomings in the shelter system, sense of safety within their communities, and the desire for autonomy and privacy. On this, what they also found, there's some literature on research on encampments. There's not a lot of great research. It's really hard to find. It's pretty anecdotal. So what this study found was research on encampments is difficult to standardize. It varies by location. Measurement tools vary greatly. And this makes it really difficult to provide clear guidance on encampment practices and models. So we went at this trying to look at different models that work in different locations and which ones seem to work better. And it's been pretty challenging to find. Also, there's variations in climate as well as the needs for the community. Those will also factor into how an encampment is structured. And we also know, we also don't know what types of encampments are more effective than others. We are trying to find that information, and each I guess document that we found trying to find research, it wasn't evident, and some of the research definitely stated that this is hard to find because there's little research on it. But coming up next, Hetty's going to give some. Sorry, I skipped ahead here. Hetty is going to give some examples of some different camps that we found across mostly the Western United States, pretty much Modesto up to Seattle. And then she'll start with this first one, Modesto. I'll click them for you, Hetty, as you want.
Thank you. So thanks, Monica. The first example that we wanted to provide was the Modesto Outdoor Emergency Shelter. So this was a temporary measure implemented by the city of Modesto. It served about 450 people on average, opened in February of 2019 and closed in December of 2019. It closed when more emergency shelter bed capacity became available. And so the city opted to close that camp in favor of funding more emergency shelter. The cleanup took about 8 weeks, and the operations were 1.6 million for those 10 months, and that did not include those cleanup costs. Another example is from Seattle. There was Licton Springs, which was one of the many tiny home villages that are in Seattle. This one was open for 2 years, and it closed due to an ordinance. So it was from April of 2017 to April of 2019. So we just wanted to kind of raise that nearby residents reported some increases in crime in the area, and 911 calls increased 30% within 2 blocks and 62% within 1 block of the tiny home village. So Seattle has some lesson learned, and they also currently have 9 city permitted villages. So they created a document called Initial Planning and Management Checklist for Sanctioned Homeless Encampments. And just some highlights for that. It's a really detailed document with a lot of lessons learned. So just some things that we need to plan for would be infrastructure. You know, how is this encampment going to look? Is it more permanent structures? Is it tents? Also the need for water, sanitation, waste removal. Food handling was a big lesson learned throughout the document. Is food coming in, or people preparing their own? Also the need for pet policies, resident safety policies, and what the ongoing staff and management structure is going to look like. So the Low Income Housing Institute in Seattle is a nonprofit who operates many of those tiny home villages. So they have a document that provides some recommendations for the villages. So depending on the size of the village that you'd like to create, they recommend 6,000 to 30,000 square feet of land, 4 to 6 months for construction. They can include 15 to 34 tiny homes with that shared kitchen, meeting space, and bathrooms. And the cost for construction from their records ranges from 100,000 to 500,000. So also in Seattle, a tiny house village that is still in operation is Georgetown Tiny House Village. So it's about 40 tiny homes, opened in March of 2017. It's still open today. Residents manage the village along with staff from Lehigh, that nonprofit, and it's funded through public and private funding. We also wanted to mention that some COVID response as it relates to sanctioned encampments. So San Francisco has sanctioned some safe sleeping sites to promote social distancing among the unsheltered population. So these began this past May with 5 outdoor sites. And as you can see from the picture, the city has outlined the area for the tent. And the city provides some portable restrooms, trash cleanup, and some outreach services. It's unclear if this will continue past the COVID response. So we don't have a lot of data on that yet.
And the next slide is a local project, which is the Hope Springs, which will be adjacent to the village at Sage. It is under construction right now, and I believe they are hoping to have their units open by the end of the year. At the end of build out, there will be 30 individual sleeping units, 3,200 square feet of community center with restrooms, showers, etc., a dog park. They will have on-site case managers and security, and then their residents will be responsible for safety. They'll have an advisory council, community service, safety rules and bylaws. I thought this was important. Just this project's been going on for a while. It's taken a while to get to fruition. So I just didn't want people to forget that, there was one of these coming to our community. It is for Hope's clients. So I know that is one of the barriers, but I thought it was important to mention. So some of the considerations going forward from what we've, some of the research we were able to do, the things that we need to think about are the cost, where would be the location. Our weather here is a little different than some of the other locations. The size, which kind of camp model would we want to explore, some CDC guidance. And then just some conclusions are that, this was kind of hard research to do. Most of the reports were anecdotal and not broadly transferable because all communities are different. There's been little information available on direct and indirect costs. Seems to vary a lot, and it's not noticed by a lot of the communities. And many communities are experimenting with new approaches, but a lot more research is needed to see, how those initiatives are working. And right now there is a larger study being sponsored by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and HUD. And hopefully when those are concluded, we might be able to find out, which models are working the best for communities and the folks that are experiencing homelessness. That's
Monica, can you tell me, when is that study going to be completed? Do you know?
I don't know, but I can find out and I can get that to you.
That's pretty important. Thank you. I apologize. Wasn't sure if you were finished or not.
That is kind of all we have. Try to answer any questions that you might have or some direction going forward.
If we want to put it back to the, we may want you to pull up certain screens on this, but if you want to put it back to where I can see the members to see who has their hand up. I will say this, having been intimately involved with the tiny homes, both in the Hope Springs project, which is under construction now, and we hope will be housing those 30 individuals hopefully soon. That was no easy undertaking, and it was north of, I think, $3 million, if I'm not mistaken. Part of it is, there was infrastructure costs, but when you talk about doing something with all of the necessary components to make it long-term successful, including the wraparound services, including the security, including all of the amenities that it needs, it's not a cheap undertaking. I will say this with regards to the tiny home presentation that you just gave. I do know when I went up and toured the Lehigh sites, I think I toured like 3 of them, the calls for service and the crime in the neighborhoods went down, not up. So I'm not sure if you were referring to maybe one tiny home village that didn't have a positive outcome. I just know the ones. And again, Lehigh's been around 20, I think, plus years with a very robust case management system and structure and security. So I just know when I went and toured those facilities, the reason I came back and advocated for them here in our region was because of those successful outcomes for not only the individuals living in them, but for the safety and security of the neighborhoods around them. So as we kind of move forward on this, we may want to vet out some of that data, because I don't want to represent only one side of an outcome when there's clearly, at least my experience has been, there's clearly another side to it.
I guess an example for just that particular village.
Thank you. And one of the questions I will have as we move forward, we will have to put this on a future agenda because I have a lot of questions on this one. And it ties back to what qualifies as shelter, because my understanding is the Modesto tents, and there's a difference between a tent shelter and a tiny home shelter. And my understanding is the more structured tent shelters that Modesto did qualify as shelter under the Boise ruling. That was my understanding. Now, someone just taking their personal tent from the river and plucking it on a piece of property that we may designate as a campsite does not qualify. So we need to get some clarity on that. And again, there's varying legal opinions, but I think that's an important point because we want to move forward with a recommendation that balances all those sorts of things out. So that was one of my questions. So anyway, I'll turn it over to the other members that might have questions or comments at this time. Councilmember Dare.
You know, the hard part is our ultimate goal is to just try to help people and get them into programs. The idea that I mean, camping is not the greatest answer. I don't think anybody on this call, thinks that that is the great answer. We're just trying to find a way to balance out between what the law will allow us to do and to give help. It's a hard balance and act, and it's hard because you take one step and there's a group who feels like somehow you're dishonoring one group. You take another step and the other group feels dishonored, and so somewhere we have to find the middle. I am concerned about some of the outcomes that you hear and see, but I've heard some good ones too. And I don't know, as an optimist that I sometimes am, sometimes I think we could do it better. We're gonna beat all the odds. But I can tell you in the end, I'm really concerned to make sure that we have things in place that can help individual people and at large help. How much finances are we putting in to just maintaining homelessness compared to helping homelessness? And that's a big concern for me. If we're just doing a bunch of things to maintain homelessness, it's almost like we're, that I don't think is a great idea. I think we want to put our finances and our time towards really trying to find things that help. And so it's just crazy how those costs just keep adding up to where it almost feels, what money are we spending there? Now, again, I'm one who advocates. I'm very concerned about our community and our river and how we treat that. And that'll be something that I'll go to my grave with, I guess, one day, because we have to. That is the gem of our community. It is an important place, and we've seen what happens, and I'm sure it's getting there now when we don't put attention towards it. It's not good. It's not a good combination. So even if we have to find the not a great answer, but an answer to move people off the river, I think that's important too. So I don't know. Thank you for your putting all that together. I think it just continues to make this job seem harder to find a good answer when I see some of those things, but I appreciate your time on that very much so. And I hope we can find some great answers to help people, but then also get them off the river. Thanks.
I hope it just outlines some of the just things that we need to think about when we're talking about an encampment. Just there's several things that we need to think about, and we need to have that discussion.
Well, and Monica, to that point, and I think it's important that we loop in some, like RISE, right? RISE gave a presentation on encampments. Their presentation and your presentation don't jive. They seem to be coming from two different perspectives. So probably somewhere in the middle is where it all lands. And I think we need to have this discussion in concert with them or others who have run these encampments to have a really robust discussion. And I do think, as Member Dare said, we're not in an ideal situation. I mean, ideal would be to have appropriate housing stock for all of our houseless residents. We're not in that position. We are in the tightest labor or housing market we've ever been in. We're in the midst of COVID, and evictions are occurring again. So we are in the perfect storm, as in perfect, as in horrible. And we have to come up with the short, the medium, and the long term. And to me, this sort of encampment thought, while resource intense, may be our best option for the short term. I don't know that, but it's certainly worth exploring. I'll go back to my comments at the beginning of this meeting, which is it all comes down to the where. We can, and part of this discussion and me pushing for this meeting was for us to start talking about the details. One, do we want to move in that direction as a short-term option? Two, what does the oversight, security, management, resource, what does that look like? So that when we do get the where, we can almost drop in place the who and the how. That will be another battle that we will have to figure out. But I figured why not work out some of the nuts and the bolts while we try to find the where, if we want to move in that direction, and possibly we don't. So anyway, Monica, thank you so much for all your work on this. And again, I do think it's worth having a meeting with some other folks that have been involved with these sorts of sites. My understanding was Modesto, part of the reason they closed down was because it was so expensive to adequately secure that it became very cost prohibitive. I didn't see that in your presentation, so I don't know if that's not true. Was it simply because this other beds opened up? I don't know. I'm hearing all sorts of things. So anyway, I'll shut up. Any other members have any questions or comments on this presentation at this time? Member Lawson.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep advocating for let's pick a population and let's fix that population. I think we still need to look at that. But my first question comes to mind is how much transitional housing do we need? And, you know, how do we get the community on board from that? Because I will tell you, the business community is very interested in that transition to move people from the streets into being productive citizens. So, I mean, I think in all of this presentation and all this, it's all nice to know all these things, but the question is truly, what do we need for emergency? What do we need for transitional? What do we need for affordable? And let's set some goals, because that's the way business community works, is they set a goal and they go after it. And I think we continue to say we need to get our business community behind us. However, we're not giving them anything to sink their teeth into at this time. So I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm just saying it as that's the way we need to think for long term. I also still going to say this again like a broken record. We know we can have success with the veteran population, and we know we're going to have success with the teenage population. You know, the younger folks, if we keep them out of homelessness. Those are the long term, you know, people that we need to keep away from homelessness, the teenagers. But the veterans have something like 80% success rate if they're in the right program. That to me would be a success and an honor to our veterans. So that's my 2 cents worth on all of this. But the bottom line, I'd like to know what we need for numbers. Because, you know, when Arlo gave his presentation, you know, we're housing 360 people roughly a night at the RSCVA, but we've only created 150, well, you know, I don't remember the number. It was somewhere less than 300. So we still have a shortage of beds. So I just like to know what we need to do. And then we know we're going to probably have to add X percentage to that each year. And, you know, we will never hit our goal, I would imagine, but at least we continue to strive for it. So in 10 years from now, we can look back and go, you know what, we started with this number and now we're at this number and we've been successful 80% of the time. And I think those are things that when I'm done with public life, I want to be able to look back and say, you know, this is something that I'm proud of that I accomplished. It's selfish, yes, I know.
I'll take a try at that one. Certainly very good points on transitional housing. It's a little bit separate than what we're discussing today. We're kind of in a crisis management mode in the middle of COVID, but critically important, and I think something that deserves its own agenda item. In terms of the near-term numbers, you know, we're sheltering 340 men effectively now is the space we have, and that's the space we're going to maintain. We haven't filled it up yet. That's in addition to the women and families. As a ballpark number for kind of our medium-term goals, we're targeting about 500 people for that sheltering need. So an increase of roughly 50% over the bed count we have now. That's what we'd hope to establish here in the next, you know, 6 months or so. All of this, in my mind, and Councilwoman Jardin mentioned it, comes down to the where. You know, whether it's a safe camp, whether it's additional tent shelters, whether it's a building itself. Fundamentally, we need a larger site or sites to accommodate the use, to be able to accommodate whatever form of sheltering the group ends up deciding on. So that's really, in my opinion, where our efforts over the next couple months really need to focus, because without a suitable site, you know, none of it's possible. It's great talking about safe camps, but where's it going to go? So that's really what we're focused on, is securing a sufficiently sized and properly located site for shelters, and then continuing efforts to get more people in housing, transitional and other.
Thank you. I think Manager Brown from the county had a comment, and then Councilmember Delgado.
Thank you. So the comment I wanted to share with the group is getting back to some of the comments that Councilman Lawson and others have said. We really, I think, need to seize the opportunity right now to energize our Built for Zero group to finish their action plan. Because a lot of the things that you guys are asking about in terms of how many, what is the population, how many of them are truly under-sheltered versus whatever other categories, comes from that. And if we're going to be relocating people from the event center to whatever the temporary location is, and then ultimately, hopefully, to the Governor's Bowl, I think the best thing we could do right now is get our arms around getting those folks into HMIS or Good Grid or both, so that we have a better sense for who the populations are, and what their needs are in terms of wraparound services before we get into the winter months and a whole different set of challenges. So I feel like at a certain level, I know all of the folks who need to make that Built for Zero action plan happen have day jobs. They have other things they need to do, because I hear it from my folks also. I just think it's critically important to take a look. And if there's a way to use CARES Act dollars to do that, to bring in additional resources to do that, particularly as it relates to the encampments and trying to get our arms around the folks that are on the river, I would just ask that we consider prioritizing that between now and when the snow falls. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I agree with that. And that's on my list as well as for our next meeting to get Built for Zero, because they will help us with some of these things we seem to be stuck on the spin cycle on. I think they would be helpful in that regard. Member Delgado.
Thank you. And I want to reply, duplicate everything that everyone's already said. Appreciate everyone's questions. Pointing to one thing that I saw in the PowerPoint is I didn't see a lot of successes in terms of just the different models. So maybe there's an opportunity as we start maybe creating a matrix of different models that were in terms of encampments, what's been successful for them in terms of how many people have been able to move out of the housing into transitional, et cetera. Those types of things. I didn't see anything in the PowerPoint, nor did I, of course, look into as much research as Monica and others have. The other one too is, I think is really important is whoever we end up working with is that there's a lot of experience involved with. I think some people come to the table with an idea, which is great, and there's not a lot of people with, I think, with the experience and expertise to kind of work into some of these places. And I think that's something we need to work on as well as a community, but also those providers to kind of say, what is accountable, how we're going to hold people accountable to make sure that they are doing the right work versus to, I think others have said, is just managing. And so how hard are we pushing to see outcomes is something else as well that I'd like to kind of have expressed in terms of what are we moving to. And I haven't yet really seen a lot of that either. And so that's maybe as we start continue these conversations or outcome-based accountability pieces, and then also success stories from all these different models versus maybe just creating something out of the blue. I think everyone else asked all of my questions, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Delgado, and I would agree with that. And I think I spoke to some really informed folks up at Lehigh when we went and toured that. And like I said, they have decades of experience. I think they could be an incredible resource. The woman that ran it, or that we met with, I'm forgetting her name. I'm sure Lisa Lee or some others from RISE would probably know those contacts there. But I think we need to tap the shoulder of some folks that have seen the good, the bad, and the successes and the failures, and you know, pick from that in conjunction with you know, Built for Zero. This is part of what we charged them with, was to help us navigate some of this. So I think it's important. So thank you, Monica and Hetty, for your work on this. Again, tight turnaround. You got what you could in a short amount of time, and I'm thankful for that. So thank you. Okay, I think that was for discussion purposes only, so we don't need an action on that. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on that item?
Madam Chair, we received online public comment from Charlie Micah requesting that this would be an action item. As you noted, you are not agendized for such. They would like additional contribution to be health and emergency short-term housing. This should be noted, this has been submitted to each of the electeds and is part of the official record.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, item 7, moving on. Board member announcements, reports, and updates to include requests for future board agenda items. Before we move into that, can I get a clarification on a prior item? And this is not reopening, it's just to get for the record. So the food delivery, the food service at the food site on 4th Street, is that an exclusive to Catholic Charities, or is RISE still a component of the food delivery as they've been in the past?
It currently is volunteers. RISE manages the calendar for the different volunteers that come each night. We have not changed anything yet. We just started having conversations last week about how this might change, how it might look, how Catholic Charities could help when we move another 170 people over next door. Trying to utilize all the services and just be consistent.
Okay, so RISE, my understanding is it's run pretty smoothly. So, I mean, I don't know why we would change a process. I just might just.
Because RISE is serving, they're not serving shelter guests. They're serving people that are coming from a variety, maybe encampments, maybe the 4th Street corridor motels, and the CAC, the Gospel Mission right now currently serves dinner to all guests that are staying at the shelter. Catholic Charities serves lunch to everybody. So if we're going to have the shelter, who would have primarily in the past been served by the Gospel Mission, 20 feet away from a mill site, we didn't want to bombard them and their volunteers with 170 new people just showing up one day. So we're taking food into consideration and trying to make things equal for everyone. We're not trying to push anybody out of the picture or anything like that. It was merely to be fair and consistent.
Make sure that RISE, if they're going to serve the food, they have enough maybe for everybody on the days in which they do it. And if not, they're already there to plug the holes.
Right, and if we brought food that we would bring every night for guests of the shelter, they're going to probably go also hop in line at the meal site. And so regardless if we give a meal or not, it's going to increase that service. So we're trying to take that into account. And we had a conversation with Catholic Charities regarding delivering lunch. And she offered in the short term to possibly be able to serve dinner for everyone in this transition period. It was just a conversation. And so I spoke with RISE just to start vetting those conversations and see if that was something that was welcome, how it might work, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. I think there was some confusion about someone not being included and the whole thing. You're working out the details. You don't want to overwhelm. You want to keep, I get it. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so future agenda items for Madam Clerk and Arlo. I'll just throw out the ones that I have and we'll move on. We were looking at, for Member Delgado had asked, well, this is the temporary process. What is any update that can be provided on the more permanent solutions and sites. There was the item of the unified approach as it relates to river issues, river encampment issues, and how that ties into COVID dollars, as well as the Boise case. And is the river, in fact, isn't it designated as a park? Question. And then campsite clarity. Again, this one's going to take a little bit of time to get all the folks who have the information we need together. Those that have run them, those that have an interest, the pros, cons, and all of that. So that's gonna, that one might take a little bit longer. And I think that's all I have. Okay. Any other members? Member Lawson.
Is this a time for me to ask a question? I mean,
Sure.
the question is, Councilman Dare called me this morning and said that Rise is the service provider at our place. And that was the first I had heard of that. That was the first he had heard about it was Saturday. And our manager, Cruz, was not aware of it when I spoke with him before this meeting. So if that's the case, I would like to know that. And with that, if that is the case, I would definitely love to reach out to them. And would you have them give me a call so we can take a tour and find out what they're doing, so I have a little more knowledge of what's going on. But that's the question. They are the service provider?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and I told Councilmember Dare earlier, I think the county put out some notification on that when that contract was awarded. But that is something we should have announced at a CHAP meeting as well, as to, I think we might have actually congratulated them at a meeting, but it may not have been an agenda item. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm gonna bounce back. One of the future agenda items that I think we do need to start talking about now. This board often talks about not having a whole lot of teeth within the things we're capable of doing, and the need for state support and structural support for this body to have a little more influence. So I do think we need to start the discussions about a BDR and what that might look like to help us in that regard. I'm not suggesting, I don't really have an idea on what may or may not, but I think the legislative session is going to be upon us fairly soon, and we don't want to miss that opportunity should it maybe benefit this group. So I would like to put that on as a future agenda item. My apologies. Any other members have any items, announcements? Anything? I apologize. I'm going to say a little bit more. We have talked about a lot of the things that we need to be doing here with this board. The gaps, the short term, the medium, the long term, sometimes the spinning of the wheels. But we can't forget all the great things that we as a region have done. I mean, the fact that our place is open is tremendous. The families that is helping, the women's shelter that will be opening soon, tiny homes that are coming online, the dorms project. Let's not forget to recognize and appreciate the things we have accomplished. They are not enough. They, but they are pretty significant for a relatively short amount of time. So let's not forget the good too. Okay, I think that's all I have on that item. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment on item 7?
Madam Chair, you have no public comment. I believe that was correct. Item 7, no general public comment as you're not stylized, so none for that.
Okay, so then we'll move on to item 8, which is the closing general public comment. Do we have has anything come in?
No, nothing has come in since your previous items, so I am showing no general public comment for this.
Thank you. And before we adjourn again, we'll just put all the information for public comment on future agendas, and hopefully all jurisdictions can push that out via their social media platforms so everybody kind of knows how they can participate in these meetings. We had a lot of great people participating before COVID hit. And I don't want to lose that momentum. There was a lot of groups with a lot of interest and influence, and I'd hate to lose that because of COVID. It's very important. Okay, any other items before we adjourn? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.